Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am Brielle Nikoloff. I am co-founder and head of product at Botmock, and we are really excited for our presentation today, Ask an Academic. So I will just hand it over to you, Matt, and you can take it from here.
All right, sounds good. Well, hello everybody who has joined us so far. We're so excited that you are spending your Friday morning or Friday afternoon or Friday evening or Saturday in the middle of the night with us, depending on where you are in the world. This is really exciting for us. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping here at the beginning. There will be a recording sent at the end of this meeting. So, in case you're wondering, just as long as you are registered for the event, your email addresses will be logged in, and Botmock, Brielle and Botmock will send a recording out to you. The other thing, this is a little bit of a different format than the format these webinars usually take. This is just sort of an open discussion type of Zoom, not a webinar. So that's why you are going to see everyone. Feel free to have your camera off or have your camera on, depending on what your preference is there. The only thing that we would ask that you please make sure you do is please keep your microphone on mute so that we limit distractions as our speakers begin to speak. You will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So you're welcome to put those questions in the chat because this is not a webinar format. We won't be doing like the Q&A style that you're used to. So yeah, put your questions in the chat. We're really interested to see what people are thinking. Depending on how many questions we have, we may or may not get to all of them, but we will be happy to kind of still take those questions and keep the discussion going in some way, shape, or form at the end of this meeting and in the days to come. So that's about it for housekeeping. I'll go ahead and introduce myself really quick, and then I'm going to let the panelists briefly introduce themselves. Many of you know me. My name is Matthew Portillo. I work for Amelia, an IPsoft company. I am the conversation design lead here, and then I'm also good friends with Brielle at Botmock, and I'm delighted to participate in this. I think this is the second webinar panel that I've been in as a participant and panelist. So and by the way, I am tuning in from sunny New York City. So I'll go ahead and let our panelists, Cameron, Isabel, and Asbjørn, introduce themselves briefly.
Okay, hi, I'm Cameron. So I'm the UX research lead at Boost AI, which is a company in Norway. Should I say more?
I can go next. My name is Isabel Haugeland. I just finished my master's degree in psychology and had the pleasure of collaborating with Boost and Syntef on this research project that we're going to present to you today.
Yes, and I'm Asbjørn Følstad, senior researcher at Syntef, Norwegian research organization, specializing in human-centered design and researching on conversational user interfaces. Yeah, that's me.
One more thing before we get started, just if you're just joining us, I just want to let you know, welcome, and this is a slightly different format than what you're used to. This is not a webinar, this is a full Zoom discussion, so if you don't mind, please make sure that your mics are muted if you haven't already. So I think that's it. Just a little bit of background about how all this came to be before I pass it off to Isabel. All of us are use LinkedIn, and we like to talk to each other a lot. Conversation designers, there are, in any one company, there typically aren't very many of us. And so we love getting out of the silo. This is one thing that makes our community really interesting. We get out of the silo, we talk with each other on LinkedIn, and we have a very vibrant community, and it's fantastic. And so we if you could, everyone could please mute your microphones. Thank you. And so, yeah, so we were talking on, I posted something on LinkedIn one day, and one of our friends, Willem, linked Isabel and Cameron and Asbjørn in the comments, and we got in a discussion about efficiency in chatbot conversations turned into an idea that Brielle and I and Cameron and Isabel and Asbjørn had to host a webinar to talk about this very topic. So that's how this came to pass. All a result of being just a really fantastic community here in the conversation design space. So so thank you again to our panelists, Cameron, Isabel, and Asbjørn. And with that, I will get out of the way and let you get started, Isabel, talking a little bit about the research that y'all did.
Yes, thank you. I will let Cameron start with the first slide so we can go to the next one. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Brielle and Matt. It's a pleasure to be here today with Asbjørn and Isabel to share some of our work with you. As I said, so I'm the UX research lead at Boost AI, which is a Scandinavian conversational AI company. We've created this user-friendly platform that allows non-technical people to create pretty sophisticated enterprise-level virtual agents or chatbots, primarily in customer service, but also in public sector, so more citizen-facing roles for various government departments in the Nordics. Scandinavia is a really special place for conversational AI because it's one of the most high-tech parts of the world. So trust in technology is particularly high, which makes it a really interesting place to do research. So we go on to the next slide. Our primary verticals are banking, debt collection, payment services, and insurance. And we work with some of the biggest companies in the Nordics. So we also have deployed virtual agents in Europe. And as you can see here, 70% of our clients are in financial services, and we have 9 of 10 of the top Norwegian banks. Next slide, please. So particularly during the pandemic, where people have had many questions around their finances, around things like deferring mortgage payments, customer contact centers. Sorry. I'll just say customer contact centers have experienced really high volumes, right? Like we've seen that since people have been kind of stuck at home. So we've been able to automate around 42% of all customer support and double the capacity of support centers over the past couple of years. So one bank that we work with, which actually this is supposed to be the previous slide, sorry, which is Sparebank 1, yeah, thank you, sorry, has told us that they would have needed an additional 40 full-time employees to cover the work that a virtual agent has been able to cover. So as you can imagine, this means that research into how people interact with the bots is really important, right? Because we want to ensure that we're making data-driven design decisions when we're building them. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so when we think about developing these virtual agents, we think about it as a journey, right? So from bots which provide basic information like opening hours and service offerings, all the way to creating bots which actively support completing tasks, like ordering specific services, so applying for mortgages, for example, all the way to one of our most advanced use cases where we have developed a bot which is in the process of taking an exam to authorize it to be able to advise customers about pension planning. So it's a great pleasure with these advanced use cases to be able to isolate variables and investigate in detail how we can facilitate better user experiences from the visual design of the chatbot through to aspects of language generation. So as Isabel mentioned and Asbjørn, we work closely with SINTEF and one of the world leading experts in the field, Dr. Asbjørn Følstad, who's with us, in designing and carrying out these studies. So I'll pass on to an outstanding researcher, Isabel, in this area, who's going to take us through a specific study that we've completed and have co-authored a paper with, which is awaiting publication, and happy to take on any questions on anything really afterwards.
Thank you, Cameron. So we started looking at the different elements of UX, and based on Hassan-Sal's theory, there's a difference between the pragmatic aspect of UX, where it's useful, it's effective, it's easy to use, easy to learn. And then you have the hedonic side of it, where it's engaging, it's stimulating. You might identify with the product that you're using. So if you're high on the pragmatic UX, but low on the hedonic UX, it's usually task-oriented. On the other hand, if it's high on the pragmatic UX and low on the high on the hedonic UX, low on the pragmatic, it's usually engagement-oriented. So obviously low on both would be unwanted, and high on both would be the desired outcome. So you can choose, go to the next. Thank you. So most customer service chatbots today are high on the pragmatic aspect of UX, but low on the hedonic aspect. So we wanted to look at how we could increase the hedonic aspect of UX to make it more desired. So we're high on both aspects. So we did research on existing literature and theory about what we already knew on the subject. And we thought that maybe strengthening social and human-like characteristics of a chatbot could increase the hedonic aspects of UX. So that was the basis for the study. So you can go to the next. Yes, so we looked at different approaches, and two things that we wanted to look at is differences in interaction mechanism and differences in conversation types. So that's two quite obvious aspects of the design that you could look at to see the differences. So when it comes to the interaction mechanisms, two quite obvious options are replying to the chatbot with buttons or replying to the chatbot with free text. So you see the illustrations, the one is using buttons and the other is using free text. So what we assumed was that the button interaction would increase the pragmatic UX, but make it less human-like and social. Obviously, because when you're talking to a human being, you would usually not press buttons to respond. So you would usually write yourself. And therefore, the free text interaction would be expected to increase the hedonic UX and also make it more human-like and social, again, because that's what you would do if you were talking to a human being. So you can go to the next. And the next thing that we looked at was the effect of different conversation types. So obviously there are a lot of different conversation types that you can have with a chatbot, but we decided to look at task-led conversations and topic-led conversation. So the task-led conversations have quite the set structure. There's a path that you're supposed to go through that's going to lead you to a goal, and it's kind of set in the way the conversation is going to be. While a topic-led conversation is more free, it's more flexible, and you have a lot more options. So the interesting thing is the two of them have quite a lot of similarities to the button interaction and the free text interaction. So the button and the task conversation are both structured, predefined, a bit more strict, and a bit more forced in what you will go through, while the topic-led conversation and the free text interactions create a bit more flexibility. So we thought that the task-led conversation would increase the pragmatic UX because it makes it easier, more efficient, and it's just easier to use, basically. And also make it less human-like and social, just like the buttons would. And at the same time, the topic-led conversation, we assumed that it would increase the hedonic UX, make it more social and more human-like, again, because it's closer to what a conversation with a human would be. So we can go to the next. Yes, so the method that we used was each participant used two different chatbots or two different prototypes. And we used a questionnaire that measured UX, both pragmatic and hedonic. And we also measured human likeness and social presence. And then we conducted interviews with the participants. So each participant tested one task-led scenario. And for this study, we used applying for a credit card because it's quite goal-oriented. It's quite straightforward and simple. And here you can see an example of that free text version and the button version. All right, so we can go to the next. Yes, and each participant also tested one topic-led scenario. So the topic that we used was receiving information and tips about pension savings. So again, you can see an example of the free text version and the button version. So we varied which version the participants got so that it was equal. How many got like the task version with free text, how many got the task-led version with buttons, and so forth. Yes, so before we went into the details on the study, we did an analysis of the general perceptions. So short version is efficiency is key. Most of the participants mentioned that they wanted a chatbot conversation to be efficient and that they wanted it to be easy and straightforward and just get things done. Another thing that was quite commonly mentioned is that human likeness may be engaging, but if it's done in the wrong way, then it might backfire. And also there are obviously differences in user preferences. Some people prefer it to be very human-like, some do not. So that's also a thing that's a bit tricky when you're designing it, obviously, to make something that's applicable to everyone. Yes, so the need for personalization is very interesting subject that you need to personalize it to age groups, to gender, to ethnicity, and a lot of these things to counteract like the user needs. And also, a lot of the participants said that the fact that the chatbot was polite and kind and had like a human-like way of talking, that was positive. But maybe the social aspect of it was a bit unexpected maybe, and a bit unnatural for the customer service setting. Yes, so we can go to the next. Yes, so we can start with participants' perceptions of interaction mechanisms. And we can go to the next. Yes, so our hypothesis was that the button, could you go like a little further maybe on the screen? Yeah, there you go, thank you. So our hypothesis was that the button interaction would increase the pragmatic UX and that the free text would increase the hedonic aspects of UX. So our results did in fact show that the buttons increased the pragmatic aspects of UX, but contrary to our expectations, the buttons also included increased the hedonic aspects of UX. So this was not quite what we expected. Both findings were statistically significant, but one of the reasons that might serve as an explanation to why we found this might be because the buttons assure that you're actually gonna get through the conversation, that you're gonna come to the goal of the conversation, you're gonna get something out of it, maybe learn something from it. While the free text, if you get interpretational issues, then you might not continue through the entire conversation and you might be left with nothing. So that's one of the reasons maybe that result was found. So we can go to the next. Yes, so when it comes to human likeness and social presence, our hypothesis was that the free text would increase both human likeness and social presence. Our findings do not support that. The results showed actually a slight increase in the button interaction compared to the free text interaction. However, these results were not statistically significant. So there were actually no statistically significant differences between buttons and free text when it comes to human likeness and social presence. And one of the explanations behind this might be that the free text interaction gives the user kind of a promise that they're able to be flexible, they're able to have the freedom to write exactly what they want, but in fact, that might not be the case. Like I mentioned, a lot of the participants experienced interpretational issues. So that might be a reason why, though in theory, you are flexible and free to write whatever you want, in practice, you're not. A lot of the participants mentioned that they had to use simple language, they had to have short answers and all these things. So maybe it gives a false promise, the free text, of what you're actually able to do in the chatbot. It might be an explanation. So you can go to the next one. Yes, so the tentative conclusions for the button versus free text is that the buttons makes it easier to use, makes it efficient, and that might be the reason for the increase in the pragmatic aspects of UX. Although a challenge obviously would be to have defined alternatives for answers that fit every user, because obviously there are lots of different options for answers and people have different preferences in the way they would want to answer, so that's a challenge. And as mentioned, the buttons also did increase the hedonic UX. This might not be a major driver behind the increase in UX and hedonic UX, but some people might see that as joyful, that it's efficient as well. So that could also be an explanation. Yes, so the free text interaction, it might be the flexibility and personalization to a certain degree that strengthens the pragmatic UX, but also, like I mentioned, the free text suggests a conversational intelligence. And if the conversational intelligence is there, then that might lead to an increase in human likeness and hedonic UX. But however, if you have the free text, but not the conversational intelligence, then that might create problems. So you can go to the next. Yes, so we can go over to the conversation types. And then we can go to the next. Thank you. Yes, so our hypothesis here was that the task-led conversation would increase the experience of pragmatic UX, and the topic would increase the hedonic UX. And so our findings said or indicated that task-led conversations did in fact increase the pragmatic UX, and that the topic-led conversations did increase the hedonic UX. So again, we can see the similarities with the button and free text. So we can go to the next. Yes, so when it comes to human likeness and social presence, our hypothesis was that the topic-led conversation would increase both human likeness and social presence. And our findings partly supported this. So our findings indicate that the topic-led conversation did in fact increase the human likeness, but not the social presence. So one possible explanation for this could be that including politeness and human-like way of talking is considered positive, but that the social presence is not expected in that context, in the customer service context. Yes. All right, so the tentative conclusions again. The task-led interaction is efficient, it's effective, again, leading to the increase in pragmatic UX, and that the task-led conversation could for some be joyful because it's efficient, but that this might be a bit limited. And also the task-led, some participants said that the task-led conversations can be experienced as a bit mechanical, obviously because they have a predefined goal of where they want to take you, so it can for some be experienced as a bit mechanical. And the topic-led, the topic-led interaction may be, it could have some effects of being human-like and therefore generating an engaging experience. But it's also quite difficult, again, because of the differences in expectations and what participants prefer, it could be difficult to design this human likeness in this setting. Yes. All right, so a bit of a summary here. Again, efficiency is king. All of our participants, almost all of our participants, said that this was a very important aspect of the conversation, and that even when the participants that did not experience that it was efficient enough also said that that was the most negative thing about the conversation. So efficiency is definitely king. And yes, the personalized interactions, like I mentioned, different preferences there. Research has, for example, indicated that younger user groups have a bigger focus on the hedonic aspect of UX, while older user groups have a more focus on the pragmatic part of UX. So the personalization is definitely interesting. Yes, and again, the human likeness, that's, like I've said, it's most people said that it was a positive experience, that it was kind, polite, all of that, but that the social part of it might be a bit unwanted in this setting. So if you go to the next. Yes, so this is the last slide I'm going to talk about. So a few implications and possible further research ways. So when it comes to the goal of having the high, both pragmatic and hedonic aspects of UX, this study has shown that because the buttons had a slight increase on the hedonic quality, and the topic-led conversation also increased the hedonic quality, one could, for example, combine button interaction with some elements from the topic-led conversation to increase the hedonic quality, but at the same time safeguard the pragmatic quality by the buttons, making it efficient and easy to understand and all of that. So that could be one thing. And even though the study didn't look at specific combinations of interaction mechanism and conversation type, it still did indicate that buttons may be appropriate more for the topic-led conversations as opposed to, the task-led conversations as opposed to the topic-led conversations, and that the free text might be more appropriate for the topic-led conversations. Again, we didn't look at this directly, but a lot of the responses from participants indicate that this could be a good, that some combinations are better than other. Yes, so the degree of anthropomorphism, maybe again for this particular context, that the human likeness is good, but not the social presence as much. So the theoretical implications, previous research has to a degree seen the pragmatic and the hedonic aspects of US as quite similar, but this study may indicate that they might not be as far apart as one might assume, because, like I said, the buttons increased both the pragmatic and partly the hedonic quality of UX. So maybe they're more intertwined than one might have thought. And also the buttons do characterize aspects that represent the pragmatic quality, but in fact, in this study at least, they also increased the hedonic quality. Yes, so the degree of free text, having free text interactions, like I said, might in theory indicate freedom and flexibility, but maybe not at the stage that technology is today, that it is actually the case. So maybe until the technology improves a bit, then it doesn't have that much of a direct effect on the pragmatic quality. But the relationship between these two might change well as technology develops. And for the human likeness and social presence, again, in literature, this has been discussed as being quite related, but however, maybe maybe they're more separate than one might have assumed. So for possible future investigations, identifying different user preferences could be very interesting to look at. Investigating different combinations of interaction mechanism and conversation type would absolutely be interesting. And also the connection between human likeness and social presence. And also, because this was an experiment, obviously no experiment is done in, it's not a natural setting. So replicating the study in a natural setting would be very interesting to see how people interact with the chatbots and their user experience, how it's affected in a natural setting. And also conducting longitudinal studies to see if the experience changes over time instead of just using the chatbot once could also be interesting to look at. Yes, so I don't know if Cameron and Asbjørn have anything to add on.
That was great, Isabel. Thank
This
you
is
so
great,
much.
Isabel. So I think you summed it up all just excellently. So it's good to move to the questions. Huh?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. We've had some discussion in the chat that I've been keeping an eye on, and one of the things that got brought up by I believe Allison was the question of sort of how you learned about all of this stuff from the users. Essentially, you know, what were some of the metrics you were looking at? And I know I think you had a slide on that, but I kind of want to focus a little bit more on that there was a degree of quantitative measurement here, and there was also a degree of qualitative measurement here. And so two things. I'm wondering if any of the three of you would like to spend a little bit more time talking about, why, here in tech, we work with big data, and it's often a very quantitative approach. But you took a sort of integrated a qualitative approach here into your study, and that limited you in some ways, but in terms of like how many people you could actually study. But why was it worth it to do that? And as business leaders, as business practitioners, here in the space, should we be taking any types of qualitative approach, and what would we gain from that? And is it worth it? For the smaller sample size that we would have to work with?
Can I have a go with that one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and I think it depends on where you are in the process. Mm-hmm. So the earlier you are in the process with a new concept or with some sort of idea or phenomenon that you want to investigate, the earlier you are, the more valuable is the qualitative part. So for this one, we were relatively early. We had some insights from the literature about what we could expect, but at the same time, we would need to sort of understand why we were seeing what we were seeing. So this combination of doing something controlled in an experiment while being able to collect rich qualitative data was really important to us. If we had sort of wanted to move on with some of the questions that Isabel was mentioning towards the end, we would stand on more sort of firm ground, and it would be more relevant to run larger quantitative studies. But I think it all depends on where you are in the process.
Anything to add, Cameron or Isabel?
I think I'm guessing you probably have an idea about this in your mind, but I just want to say that I think I agree with what you might be thinking about, which is, you get really rich data from qualitative investigations, right? But obviously they're really time consuming. So, it's really, really important to, it's one thing to, with conversation analytics, you can see a lot of statistical data, right? And so you can say, okay, this is where people are logging off. This is where something's gone wrong. This is blah, blah. But actually, it's really impossible to know from that kind of data what people are thinking and what they're feeling when they're engaging in the process or in the interaction. So qualitative approach is really the only way to actually find out, from end users what actually is going on in their minds. And that information is really helpful to us in, as Asbjørn said, thinking about, okay, well, fine. Now we have better insight into what people are thinking. Now let's go ahead and test something on a larger scale, So it's really, really important. I agree. This qualitative work is, it's actually in many ways the most fun part to me, because you also hear really surprising things from people. I think in this one, somebody said something like, was it Isabel? Like, I'm not talking to a hot dog stand. Stop talking to me like a, like, I'm not ordering a hot dog. I'm trying to get a credit card or whatever it was,
Yeah, people say the funniest things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a question, were you watching your test subjects actually use the bot while they were using it, or did you speak with them only afterwards?
No, I was in the room during the entire time. So first they used the first chatbot, then they did the questionnaire. Then we did short follow-up interviews just to make sure to get like the initial response after using the chatbot. And then they used the second chatbot, the questionnaire again, and another follow-up interview, and then an in-depth interview, because I didn't want to ask questions about comparing the different interaction mechanisms or comparing the different conversation types before they had used both, because if I had done that before they used the second one, then that would affect the way they looked at the second one, because they would be too concerned with that.
Got it. We had a quick question just come in. Was this all on the same device, phone, laptop?
Yes. In total, there were 35 participants, and most of them just used a desktop, but the 7 last ones did the entire procedure, and then they tested the chatbots again on a mobile device. Yes.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. And Brielle, you had asked a question a second ago in the chat, something about personalization.
Yeah, I asked that question. My first question was more about, Isabel, you mentioned that sometimes the personalization backfired. Do you have any examples of that?
Good question. Well, it kind of depends on if you try to personalize it too much, and then you have, for example, an older user group that just wants to get something done. So you try to tailor it to a certain degree, and then the person sitting there actually just wants to get over with the task and just like move on. And a lot of people said that they are very aware of the fact that they are actually talking to a chatbot and not a human being. So if it tries to make it too personal, then it comes across as a negative thing instead of a positive thing. So a lot of the participants said like, oh, I'm so aware of the fact that it's actually a chatbot and not a human being. So why is it trying to pretend like something else? So it could also go the other way.
Yes, and I think this backfiring that we observed there also was concerning user expectations, really, so that the increase in sort of human likeness and aim for sort of making more social conversations, it by necessity increase user expectation, and for some this may lead them to sort of have way too high expectations of what actually you can converse with a chatbot about. So I think that is also an important part of it, that you sort of you may design for failure if you become more human-like or more social than what the chatbot actually can carry.
That makes sense. So not wanting to make it seem like so human-like that you would be tempted to ask it to do things that are outside of the scope.
Yes, and we have been. This is something that we are working in right now. It's research on where we look at how the way people phrase their messages to the chatbot, how that affects the help they get in the chatbot. This is something that Cameron and I have been collaborating on. And one thing that we see is that that of course, if you're able to communicate your message in a concise manner as a user of the chatbot, you will often get better help. So in a way, a key challenge for us as conversational UX researchers or designers will be to sort of, on the one hand, try to make users communicate in a succinct manner, but at the same time provide this as a rich and engaging experience. So it's kind of you want to do both here, and it's one of the really interesting challenges in conversational user interfaces.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking, I feel like call it the intelligence, the accuracy of the language recognition would indeed have maybe had an effect on your results for those more for the text-based interactions, and how they maybe could have increased the pragmatic quality of UX there. Clearly.
And also see in the chat this is a question on the insights on the use of buttons and free text together. Yeah,
yes.
And this is another interesting thing, which we also see in more or later research that we're working on, is that there seems to be development not only in the chatbots, but also in chatbot users. So that chatbot users increasingly become more skilled at communicating with chatbots, so that instead of like for some of the companies that we are working with, instead of as only for a couple of years ago that people were confused by having both buttons and free text options in the chat. This is something that they now understand. Maybe not only because the designs have gotten better, but also because the users are more skilled in using the chatbot. So it's the conversational interface is kind of a conversational skill that you need to learn as a user, and people are gradually adapting to it.
It's interesting because we talk a lot about in just UX, in UI design, just generally, even beyond conversational AI. We talk about, a user should never have to adapt to the interface. A user behavior shouldn't have to adapt to the interface. The user interface should adapt to the user, and that's should be, in theory, true whether that's a chatbot, whether it is a Mac operating system, whether it's the buttons on your microwave oven, it should be anything. But what you're saying is so interesting, is like, it's almost like, well, we didn't do that fast enough for conversational AI. And so now users have an idea about how they should or how they have to talk to conversational agents or conversational AI. And it is interesting to me, to wondering if that is having a sort of an effect, a freezing effect almost, and it affects the user expectation. They know, because we tell them, because that's the ethical thing to do, that when they're talking with a human versus with a conversational AI, and they have this set of expectations for conversational AI and how that interaction is going to proceed, and how they need to adapt themselves to do it. And I kind of, in a way, it's like, okay, great, whatever. But in a way, it's like, oh, I wonder if we missed an opportunity to really, create a very human, response and human style ease of interaction between bots and humans.
Yes, it may be a missed opportunity, but then again, I think there are future or more opportunities to come in the future. And I think one of the sort of opportunities right now is to optimize the interaction between the bot and the customer service personnel, which may take over when the bot cannot answer questions, so that the users see the...
Hold on 1 second.
Just a reminder to everybody, make sure your microphones are on mute.
No, but so that there is an increasing number of companies that integrate their chatbots with the chat, and then if the chatbot cannot answer the question, the customer service personnel takes over. And from the customer service personnel perspective, this is making the dialogue potentially more effective because the user has already sort of explained his or her problem. And I think when the user also see it this way, that the interaction with the chat is useful even if the chatbot cannot answer, because this will help speed up the conversation with the customer service personnel afterwards. I think that it may be one of the more future design challenges in terms of the human-like conversation.
Yeah, fascinating.
That makes sense. There's another question about whether any of you have insight or intuition on the use of buttons and free text together.
I think we covered that probably in the previously, but Nicholas, I see you there. If there's anything else you want to add to the question beyond what we addressed, by all means, yeah, let us know in the chat. I did see that that Anna had a question. Why do you think the participants said that they don't want such a I'm assuming it's conversational assistant to be social, or that they're not interested in social presence of a conversational agent?
Well, I think, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Isabel. Go ahead, Isabel, and I'll supplement.
No, I think the context is very important there. Obviously, if you're looking for a conversational agent that's supposed to be your friend, or if it's supposed to be a therapist or something like that, then I think it would be different. But I think in this context, it might be experienced as a little bit unnatural. You can think if you were talking to someone in customer service, at least I personally would expect that they were polite and kind, but maybe not trying to be my friend as much. So the human likeness would be positive for my sense, at least. I think the context is quite determined for this study. Maybe Asbjørn and Cameron have anything to add.
I think this is such a good question, and we were in a way we were so disappointed that we didn't find this appreciation for the social customer service chatbot. A PhD student, or a colleague that is also a PhD student that I'm supervising, Sintef, she's doing studies of the companion chatbot Replica and the users of Replica, and trying to take the lessons learned from those interactions and those sort of perceptions of a social chatbot over to, for example, customer service. And it seems so promising, but it's at the same time so challenging. So this is also a future opportunity to sort of bring the social into customer service interactions. And I do believe it's possible, but we haven't figured out really how yet. Maybe Boost will be the ones that figure it out, Cameron.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've also seen in another couple of studies where, now this is the downside of qualitative research, right? Because that you're getting what people say, right? So people are telling you what they think, or at least what they think. And then sometimes you sort of see what they say, which is, okay, this is what they think. And then you actually watch them do something different. So sometimes they might say, we did a study on human likeness and trust, for example, and people would often say things like, "Oh, well, we don't want a human-like chatbot. No, right? But that's too creepy, whatever they would say." And then we saw that if we strip the chatbot of all human likeness, both in the visual design and in the language, that they went, "Oh, but this would be a lot better if there was a little more human-like." So that's, I think it's really important to keep in mind the pitfalls of actually asking people directly. And I think there's something to, I'm really interested in trying to figure out more ways of actually figuring out you know, what's going on subconsciously with people when we're looking at these. And that's, I think, something also that we've been discussing for future research.
And that's what I think is so interesting about it. Like Isabel, it seems like it's a really great thing, very important thing to be in the room watching, watching people, because they're not necessarily going to articulate a rational response to what they just experienced. Or maybe, you know, especially if you ask them immediately after, maybe if you were to wait, I can't remember if you mentioned this in your thesis, maybe waiting at 24 hours or a week to ask people about the experience and what they thought of it would also yield a different result. Who knows? But it sounds like it was a great thing that you were in the room to actually observe them.
Yeah, and it was interesting because when I saw the initial reactions, then at the end and in the interview, I could also ask, okay, so when you were in the conversation and the chatbot did this, you reacted like that. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? And that's the kind of questions that you wouldn't be able to ask if you weren't actually in the room with them. So that was very interesting.
Yeah. Gaurav's been patiently waiting for his question to be answered, so I want to make sure we get there. He says, let's see, until the entire chatbot ecosystem matures, the bots which are advanced might be underutilized and have a disadvantage. Users might expect them to be a little bit more, regimented and like an IVR phone tree. Any thoughts on that we might be, that there are certain platforms out there that we might be underutilizing, or that maybe this plays back into user expectations about what they can do when we do get an advanced system? How will we get users to utilize it up to its capacity?
I think this is also an excellent excellent question, and I think it's also about, well, what people on the one hand think or actually know, and then what people do sort of not thinking. When we interview people about capabilities of chatbots and sort of what they expect chatbots to be able to do, they are surprisingly, at least to our surprise, they are good at predicting what the chatbot could do and sort of how the chatbot works. Their mental models are pretty good. But then at the same time, the way we converse with each other is so automatic. It's so we're so sort of used to speaking in a particular manner. So even though we know sort of how or users know how to interact with chatbots, they may still, unless they are sort of familiar with the particular type of chatbot, they still may not utilize its capabilities to the full because they have not sort of yet learned the way to communicate with it properly. That may be a conversation UX challenge, of course, but I think also it has to do with maturation, as Gaurav was saying here.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. We are getting to the end of our time here, and I wanted to do one more question. This one from Mari Park in my home state of Texas. And Mari asks, is it fair to say that buttons make it, quote, easier for the user to get what they need or where they need to go? And if yes, if we're only starting out having a chatbot somewhere, will it give a better UX to maybe start with buttons and then move to free-form text as we grow? And I think what she means by that is, as they roll out a chatbot experience, if they start with, rolling out experiences that are button driven, and then maybe start to gradually introduce free text driven experiences, what are your thoughts on that and whether that's viable?
You want to have a go with that first, Cameron, or should I?
No, go ahead. I'll throw something out at the end.
Yes. This also is a great question. And I think buttons are, because it's technologically simple, it's easy to do. We sort of look a little bit down on it, at least from our perspective at Sintef. So we sort of see that as well. That is not conversational, it's just buttons. But from user perspective, it's efficient. You don't type error, you don't do typos. The phone do not do typos for you through word prediction. You know what you can ask, so you don't have to sort of think out your question. And for example, in a banking domain, say that you want to ask the chatbot about different kind of pensions. You don't really know what those kinds of pensions are called. So a free text field would sort of leave you at a bit at a loss. But with the different alternatives presented to you, the bot actually helps you formulate your questions. So I think the maturation that we can hope for, and maybe that would be good, would be to have this sort of efficient interaction between buttons and free text, so that continue to provide button interaction, but have this flexibility provided through free text when needed, and to have this designed in a way where users actually understand that they can interact in both ways, sort of at their best wish. What would you say? What your thoughts on top of that, Cameron?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think what's really interesting is that, for, at least so in our solution, as Asbjørn mentioned, that if you have buttons, you can always still type in free text and see what happens. But there's a couple things here. One is, again, I'm Mr. It depends, it works, but it always depends on the audience as well, because let's say, let's say that your target group may not be native speakers of the language that the bot is, primarily written in, right? So then buttons actually can help them as well, right? Maybe it's, just to help guide people a bit more, and as Asbjørn said about like making sure that there's no spelling errors or typos, and those are accounted for. But and we always want the action replies or the messages that are written to be as brief and concise as possible, because people, want to go fast. They want things to be efficient. You can always list options in the question. So if you ask somebody, what kind of drink would you like? You can have a list of buttons, or you could actually have a list and say, Coke, water, or iced tea. And then that would be an option, an idea of like a free text, but it may not. So this is like kind of, it's a conversation design question, right? So which one is going to look better? Which one is going to fit on the screen better, right? So it's tricky, but I think the mixed approach, the more balanced approach of having buttons and free text there, and helping people to understand that just because there's a list of buttons, it doesn't mean that they're trapped or restricted, because people really like that sense of freedom, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to. I see we're at the top of the hour, and so I want to go ahead and wrap this up before people have to drop off. But the first, a little softball question for Brielle as we talk about buttons versus free text is, if for the attendees on this call who are interested in trying this out and test out building, buttons-based interaction versus text-based, do you have any ideas about how they might build those experiences or build mock-ups of them? Prototypes of them.
I'm so glad you asked, Matt. You can use Botmock to test out building your own. We also have a nice testing suite, so you can run your own tests, test with users, see what flows they went down. So I'll just put a link to a chatbot prototype, a customer service template in the chat, and feel free to clone it and make it your own.
And I'll go ahead and jump on that and say, once you've kind of got ideas about this and designs and you're ready to get to building, and if you work for an enterprise, Amelia is a fantastic platform as well. So I'll be happy to talk with you about that as well. Last question for our three panelists, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'm just wondering, how do we join for attendees on the call? How do we join your fan club? How do we follow you and keep up to speed with what you're working on, what you're researching, when your papers will be released? That's our final question for you today.
Well, from my perspective, I think if you would seek out for a place to meet and discuss further on chatbot research. If you would seek out a workshop that I'm co-organizing this fall called Conversations, the Conversations chatbot research workshop should bring you there online. That would be a great place to keep up and to get more insights on chatbot research. So I'll recommend that one.
Did you put a link to that in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. And maybe if you all could link to your LinkedIn or your Twitter or wherever else you want people to find you, that would be awesome.
As much or as little as you'd like.
Yeah. Isabel, someone asked if we could send out the deck along with the recording. Is that fine with you?
Oh yeah, as long as it's fine with Cameron and Cameron and Asbjørn, that's fine with me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have a paper coming out as well, which I guess we post to LinkedIn. Maybe we can send it to you as well once it comes.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we can spread the word about that.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much on behalf of myself and the conversation design community. It's been so great to talk with you all. I feel like this is a discussion that I mean, I could have geeked out for hours more on a Friday talking about this. I really appreciate the research and the work that you've done. This really makes a difference to our community, the businesses and brands that we work for, and of course, you know, most importantly, the users that we build for. So that's yeah, that's all I have to say. And yeah, Brielle, yeah, feel free to close us out.
Thank you all so much for joining. This was a great conversation. We had kind of all talked about how there's not much academic research to really lean on in this industry. So it was so awesome to be able to ask an academic, a real live academic, 3 real live academics. And yeah, thank you for the great session. And we will see all of you around in the Twitterverse, LinkedInverse, and other places.
All right, everyone.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your evening, everybody. Take care.
Have
Bye.
a good weekend. Stay safe.